It was here in Chicago.
Just look at the roster of the people that have come out of Second City in television, film, everything.
Viola Spolin is the mother of improvisation.
When people commit themselves to making kids' summers magical, those kids feel that. And they bring that feeling to school and how they treat other people, and that is priceless.
Lyric Opera of Chicago presents The Magic Flute. Mozart's miraculous blend of comedy and romance comes to life in a critically acclaimed production. On stage, November 3rd to 27th. Tickets at lyricopera.org.
Programming on WTTW is made possible in part by an anonymous donor who is also proud to support Donors Choose.
The Federal Reserve is throwing everything at this coronavirus.
The Fed injected billions into the economy.
We're trying to create a bridge.
The Fed stepping in on an unprecedented scale.
But at what cost?
I believe this is the economic story of our time.
Frontline investigates.
Tonight at 10 on WTTW.
On Nova, Universe Revealed.
Our Milky Way is this beautiful place, like an abstract painting. The Andromeda Galaxy will collide with the Milky Way. We want to know our destiny.
Milky Way on Nova.
Wednesday at 9 on WTTW.
Hi, I'm Jackie visiting from Portland, Oregon.
And I'm Victoria from Chicago. And you're watching WTTW.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schatz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight,
park management failed our workers.
Widespread sexual abuse at Chicago's pools and beaches revealed in a new report.
They need to pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill. That shows good faith.
Democratic U.S. Senator Joe Manchin continues to hold up the president's Build Back Better proposals. So what's next? We go one-on-one with Senator Dick Durbin.
It's easy to force the store to collect the sales tax.
How changes to the online sales tax you pay in Illinois were timed just right for the government.
They could potentially protect against other coronaviruses.
A new study shows COVID and SARS vaccine might protect against related viruses, even the common cold.
I have to change my whole routine when it comes to groceries now.
Another grocery store closes on the west side. We look at barriers some Chicagoans face to accessing fresh, healthy food.
Scientists probe the atmosphere of a distant exoplanet and how a study of baldness in mice could lead to hair loss treatments for men and women. Look at that mouse right there.
And meet the new artistic directors at Steppenwolf Theater as they dedicate a new education center and add an additional theater to their campus. But first, some of today's top stories. The FBI is investigating Loretto Hospital's COVID vaccination program after people with connections to hospital leaders jumped the line to get their shot earlier this year. That's according to the Better Government Association and Block Club Chicago. They report 2 federal grand jury subpoenas were sent to the state's public health department in May and September related to a criminal investigation. Loretto did not respond to requests for comment. A cyclist and graphic designer killed last week is remembered at a downtown vigil. Police say Ade Hogue was riding his bike on Grand Avenue approaching DuSable Lakeshore Drive on Wednesday night when he was struck and killed by a woman driving a van. He died on Friday. Hogue was a member of the half-acre competitive cycling team. At a vigil about an hour ago, a so-called ghost bike painted white was placed at the site of the crash to commemorate him. Hogue was 32 years old. O'Hare Airport's long-awaited people mover is finally set to get moving. The automated airport transit system now features a larger fleet of new cars using the line built in the early 90s.
Integrating a new rail vehicle on an existing track and control system is not a project undertaken every day. And our goal was to create and modernize this system, not just for the needs of today, but also for the long-term future of O'Hare International Airport.
And the project's been plagued by years of delays and disputes with the contractor. For now, the People Mover will run from 10:30 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. when the airport is busiest. The city's aviation commissioner says they hope to have it running full-time early next year. In addition to new vehicles, which the city says nearly doubles passenger capacity, the transit line was extended to a new facility connecting to rental cars and Metra. Up next, one-on-one with Illinois' senior U.S. Senator. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Lawmakers were hopeful last week, but there's still no vote scheduled on President Joe Biden's signature proposals after Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia put the brakes on it. Take a look.
Simply put, I will not support a bill that is this consequential without thoroughly understanding the impact that it'll have on our national debt, our economy, and most importantly, all of our American people.
And joining us to talk about the Build Back Better bill and much more is Illinois senior U.S. Senator Dick Durbin, who serves as the Senate Majority Whip and chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Durbin, thank you for being back here. So you heard Senator Manchin there. President Biden says the votes are there for both the infrastructure bill and the social spending bill. Congress has vowed to vote this week. Manchin's still skeptical. Are there 51 votes in the Senate for both these bills?
Yes, I think there will be. And we have to work through a long, involved process involving the House, the Senate, the moderates, the progressives. The Republicans are all up in the bleachers watching, but I think we've got a good chance to get both bills done.
And Senator Manchin says he still thinks there are gimmicks in this bill. He still doesn't quite understand its impact on the federal deficit. What are the things that you think need to be ironed out for him?
Well, I'm not sure. I talked to Joe just 2 hours ago about the immigration issue, which is one that I care about a lot, and it's very important to a lot of senators and congressmen. We're trying to find some common ground. We have several problems. First, reconciliation, the name of the process, is very specific on what is allowed and what isn't allowed. Second, there is a gatekeeper involved in this, and that is the Senate parliamentarian who can give thumbs up or thumbs down to any piece that's put in there. And third, we've got to find something that truly does help and solve the problem. We haven't had a major change in our immigration laws in 35 years, and we desperately need it.
I think you need to clarify that, because you're talking about, you've written there might be a backdoor way to have some kind of residency status for undocumented immigrants as part of some of these economic bills. Can you explain that?
Well, I'll try. There are three proposals in the Senate. The first two I won't go into in detail, but they were rejected by the parliamentarian. The third proposal is an immigration visa known as parole. It has nothing to do with criminal proceedings whatsoever, but it's called parole. And it says that the people who are eligible for it once applying would be able to live in the United States, though they're undocumented, without fear of deportation. They would be allowed to legally work. They could travel outside the United States and return. And if they pay their taxes, they're entitled to the regular benefits that comes with those who live in this country.
And you said you just spoke with Senator Manchin about that. And he's skeptical of so many parts of these social spending bills. Is he on board with the immigration proponent here? Because it sounds like that could add a new wrinkle for some legislators.
Well, it wasn't my first choice. Pathway to Citizenship and the DREAM Act and that sort of thing. They were in the first two things we submitted that were not accepted. I'm not going to go out on a limb and speak for Joe Manchin, but we have an ongoing conversation about this issue. He voted for comprehensive immigration reform when we passed it in the Senate several years ago. So he's on the record for immigration reform, and those who are critical of that idea have a vote that he's already cast. So I'm asking him to stick with us now to get the job done with something that is very positive.
And back to the rest of the substance of Build Back Better, what exactly is in here for Illinoisans?
Oh boy, in terms of help for our state, a lot. Let's start at the obvious. This notion of giving additional 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds additional years of education is dramatic. 250,000 kids in Illinois would benefit from that. In addition, the idea of daycare being available for those people across our state, 750,000 kids could be eligible for that. The notion that we are going to extend the tax cuts for children that has cut child poverty in half in our state affects dramatic numbers. I don't have the exact number on that as I sit here and talk about it. We have climate change legislation included in this, which I think is absolutely essential. We cannot ignore the obvious. The world is getting into a dangerous state because of our greenhouse gas emissions. And I'm going to the Glasgow, Scotland conference. Many of us believe that we owe this to our kids and grandkids to get it right.
Specifically, what are the climate provisions that are still in there that will, in your mind, get 51 votes in the Senate?
There are a lot of incentives for businesses, individuals, homes, homeowners and such to do the right thing, to move in the right direction. And if they qualify for these incentives, they're going to move us toward having an economy that's not driven by the fossil fuels. The notion is to cut in half our dependence on fossil fuels across America by the year 2030, not that far away, and to try to have net zero when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions in 2050. That is a global goal. Some countries are serious about it. I think the United States should be. Some are not serious and have to be convinced, and sadly that includes China.
And one of Senator Manchin's big concerns overall with the bill is how exactly it's paid for. How exactly is it paid for in a final version that'll be voted on?
I'll be very blunt about it. Joe Biden has said we are not going to increase taxes on people making less than $400,000 a year, period. And we have stood by that as the basic guidepost when it comes to raising revenue. But if you are a wealthy individual, a millionaire or a billionaire, if you are a profitable corporation and you're not paying your fair share of taxes, you're going to hear from us. We think these folks ought to be accepting the same responsibility that the average family in Illinois accepts every single year.
Also today, Senate President Chuck Schumer announced a major piece of voting rights legislation will be put up for a vote and announced there is one Republican on board, Senator Murkowski from Alaska, but you'd need at least 9 more to break a filibuster and actually move forward. So what's likely to happen with this bill, the voting rights bill?
Well, we'll fall short of the 60 votes that's necessary. The Republican filibuster will prevail. But give me a minute to praise my friend Lisa Murkowski. She called me from Alaska on Saturday, or Friday or Saturday, and to tell me that she was going to join us. This is significant. There was a time when the Republicans were as supportive, if not more supportive, of civil rights than the Democrats, and that's back in the 1960s. But now the tables have turned, and for some reason, Republicans are not interested in the Voting Rights Act. She is breaking the mold and stepping forward and showing a lot of courage in doing it, and I want to praise her for doing that.
You know, a few weeks back, your Senate Judiciary Committee put out a report about January 6th, saying that, quote, we were half a step away from a constitutional crisis. There's been a lot of reporting that confirms that very notion and more that comes out every single day. So my question to you, what is Congress poised to do to prevent an actual constitutional crisis where an attempt at overturning the results of election is successful?
Well, first let me say that we want to make sure that we have a clear record of what happened January 6th. There is a committee underway. Adam Kinzinger of Illinois, the congressman, Republican congressman, and Lynn Cheney are both on the committee. It's a bipartisan effort in the House. I support it. But it should have been a bipartisan commission that did this, as we have in the past over 9/11 and other issues in our history. The reason we don't have this type of commission was Senator Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, said, I won't participate in it. Well, that troubles me because I was with him on January 6th when we were taken to a separate location, and I know how upset he was. He didn't feel happy about the outcome on January 6th any more than I did, but now he doesn't want to get a record made. That's unfortunate. So in the meantime, what can we do about it? Well, at first, it lies in the hands of the American people. They have got to elect presidents who respect the Constitution. This last president, Donald Trump, first went to every court in the land and was thrown out because he had no evidence of voter fraud. Then he turned and tried to take over the Department of Justice, which we showed in our 400-page analysis, and was unsuccessful in doing that. And when that failed, he called for a rally and turned the crowd loose on the Capitol. Now, that is the kind of irresponsible, unconstitutional conduct that we as voters have to make sure never happens again.
And Senator, we interviewed Robert Costa, who wrote that book with Bob Woodward, talking about the Eastman memo, basically a blueprint for a vice president sending the vote back to state delegations and having states send alternative slates of delegates. So how do you prevent that kind of situation? It certainly seemed like a blueprint if folks in bad faith wanted to execute that kind of plan.
We were damn lucky, let me be honest with you, because this president was bound and determined not to give up the office, even though he clearly lost the election. And though everyone who's looked at it has found maybe an error in votes here and an error in vote there, they're so small, so minuscule. After $5.7 million was spent in one county in Arizona, they ended up in finding more votes for Joe Biden. And that was exactly the opposite of what they were looking for. So let me tell you, we've got to be careful as a nation that we choose women and men to serve as president of the United States who respect the Constitution and don't go off on an ego trip and destroy this democracy on us.
Senator, closer to home, you questioned Attorney General Merrick Garland last week about violence in Chicago. You know, many presidents have sent extra resources to the U.S. Attorney's Office here to take on gangs, to bring RICO cases, to take on gun cases. Still, Chicago suffers a high violent crime rate. Is there anything else that you believe that the Justice Department should be doing?
Well, the gun violence situation in Chicago is intolerable. People, as one of the aldermen said, are fed up, and I'm one of them. To think what we are allowing as part of one of the greatest cities on earth is just unacceptable. So I had a closed-door meeting last week with the federal law enforcement agencies, and they briefed me on what they're doing. It's good. It's very important work. It doesn't match the resources of state and local law enforcement. They have to lead in this effort, but we need to complement them anywhere we can. And I want to say the report of the U.S. Attorney's Office this morning about the RICO case brought against the West Side drug gang that is supposedly involved in some 20 homicides is the kind of action I want the feds to take on. We've got to complement any state efforts to do the same and make it clear that this gun violence is unacceptable, even if it is happening in some areas of the state and not in others. We're all in this together.
That is a recent case that the U.S. Attorney's Office put out. And speaking of, we interviewed the U.S. Attorney John Lausch just a few weeks ago. He was kept on when most U.S. attorneys were changed due to the change of administration. You and Senator Duckworth wanted to keep him in the interim. Do you anticipate he'll stay on for the remainder of this current presidential term?
There are over 90 U.S. attorneys, and I think maybe 2 were retained. John Lausch was one of them. Senator Duckworth, and I believe that he is involved in sensitive, protracted litigation efforts against individuals, high profile. I won't go into names and places, and that they should be allowed to complete this investigation. John Lausch, I might add, was considered to be U.S. attorney when Barack Obama was elected president. So I think he fits it in terms of his lack of political bent, that he is a professional, and I believe he's doing a good job. I hope he makes some timely efforts in terms of those investigations.
Seems like that he will be there then for the foreseeable future. And there are big investigations, as we've covered on this program, so I think our viewers get the picture in terms of what you may be talking about. And Senator Dick Durbin, thank you as always for joining us.
Thanks, Paris.
And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. 4 lifeguards abused, assaulted, and harassed girls at Chicago's pools and beaches. That's according to the result of an investigation released earlier today by the Chicago Park District's watchdog. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more. Heather, how far back do these allegations, or how far back did these alleged incidents occur, and what is the status of the accused lifeguards?
Well, these allegations date back to 2015 and occurred as recently as the summer of 2020. 3 of the 4 lifeguards outlined in the interim inspector general's report have already resigned, and a 4th should be fired, according to the interim inspector general, Allison Perona. There are, of course, Mike Kelly, who was superintendent of the Park District, he was ousted under fire for his handling of this investigation last month. But the probe is ongoing, and there are other Park District employees who have been suspended, and that there are other allegations that are still under investigation.
And why did it take so long for the Park District to take action on these allegations?
Well, that really is the question. There were two reports released today, one focused by the Inspector General on the allegations themselves. The other, a report from a law firm hired by the Park District, examined the role of the Park District's leadership in handling these complaints. And it found that Mike Kelly took 6 months to forward the complaint when he received it to the Park District's HR, Human Resources Division, and for an investigation to be launched. And there are no clear answers tonight exactly why that happened. Park District Board President Avis Lavelle said it was clear that the Park District was quite dysfunctional when it came to handling these allegations. And she said there were systemic problems with the way the Park District's board was set up to handle these sort of events. However, interim superintendent Rosa Escareno, who replaced Mr. Kelly, said that that allowed a culture of abuse to, quote, fester.
Okay, and so while we're on it, the Park District, also released a report on former Superintendent Mike Kelly. What did they find?
Well, that he took too long to address these, and that even while he was assuring other Park District officials that he was handling these reports correctly, he was not. And I think what's most damning in these reports today is that it's clear that even after these first complaints were made to officials, that other lifeguards, some as young as 15, were being abused, harassed, and bullied.
Okay, so Interim Superintendent Rosa Escareno, who replaced Kelly, says that there needs to be a better system for handling these allegations. Here she is.
We need to take this opportunity to tear everything apart and figure out how we rebuild it in a way that does exactly what we intend to do. How do we find clarity for the victims or anyone who wants to report any violation of this nature to the Park District?
And Heather, what is the Park District doing to ensure that complaints aren't ignored like this in the future?
Well, there will be a new Office of Protection created to handle these sort of complaints. And that, we were told today, is designed to prevent these sort of complaints from being failed to be investigated. However, that is very much a work in progress, and it's not exactly clear who would have authority over that office and how it would be run. The devil really will be in the details in this one.
And lastly, Avis Lavelle, she's the board president, facing calls to resign from two members of the city council. What role did she play, and will she resign?
She said she would not resign, and that while she expressed regret about her decision to trust the former superintendent to handle these complaints, she says that her role as board president really prevented her from doing much other than that. It's important to note that Avis Lavelle is a veteran City Hall operative. She worked for former Mayor Richard M. Daley. She served on the school board. So she's certainly somebody who understands how investigations happen and how they should be conducted. And it's not clear whether the calls that from Alderman Scott Wagasback and Alderman Michelle Smith, that's simply not good enough, whether that will cause her to either lose her position on the board or perhaps reevaluate her decision to stay on.
Okay, a lot more to come on this story, I'm sure. Heather Sharon on the case for us. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Brandis.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website. That's at WTTW.com/news. Up next, could the coronavirus vaccine protect against more than just COVID-19? Stay with us to find out. Spend Saturday evening with the Voices of Chicago. Latino voices at 6 and Black voices at 6:30. See you on Saturdays.
Could the coronavirus vaccine actually provide protection against the common cold? Many of us refer to COVID-19 as coronavirus, which is actually the name of a family of viruses that includes SARS and the common cold. A new study shows that vaccination against the coronavirus or previous infection can provide protection against other viruses in that same family. And joining us to talk about the study is one of its authors, Pablo Peñalosa McMaster, Assistant Professor of Microbiology and Immunology at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you, Paris. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, it's good to have you. And as we just mentioned, coronavirus, we've heard a lot about COVID-19, but it belongs to the larger family of coronaviruses. So explain what a coronavirus is.
Right. So coronaviruses are RNA viruses. They're very large, and they, believe it or not, they have an error-correcting mechanism. So it's not they're not as mutable as flu viruses or as HIV. So in a way, they're RNA viruses that are very large and have a way to correcting their errors. But sporadically, they make mistakes, and that's the basis for variants. That's how variants evolve. It's just by those little mistakes that the error-proof polymerase cannot make. But in a summary, coronaviruses are just a big family of RNA viruses.
So there's not a whole lot of variation unless, as you mentioned, there's a mistake like the Delta variant and others. And your study demonstrated that vaccination against COVID-19 might actually provide immunity against other coronaviruses. Explain that.
Right, exactly. So we look at this both in humans as well as in mice, and we took humans who received the RNA vaccines and also the J&J vaccine, and we noticed that those the antibodies that were elicited in vaccinated humans also cross-reacted with other coronaviruses, suggesting that they could potentially protect against other coronaviruses. We did this in vitro studies, but also in other mouse studies, mice that received SARS-CoV-2 vaccines or SARS-CoV-1 vaccine, and then we noticed that they were also protected against other coronaviruses. So what this suggests is that if you think about future pandemic, you might not necessarily need to make a vaccine from scratch based on the emerging virus. You could potentially piggyback on a prior vaccine that has a related sequence.
And there's kind of already, and as you mentioned, the roadmap is already here with the current vaccine. Now, we mentioned the common cold is related to this family of coronaviruses. Does that mean there could be immunity to the common cold if you're vaccinated against COVID-19?
Precisely. So partial immunity. So what we did is that we first vaccinated mice with a SARS-CoV-1 vaccine that was developed almost 20 years ago. And these mice that received the SARS-1 vaccine were also protected against SARS-2. But then we decided to go a little bit further because SARS-1 and SARS-2 are genetically related. They're like cousins of one another. They're almost 80% identical. But then we decided to look at a more distant challenge. So we vaccinated mice with a SARS-2 vaccine, and then we exposed them with the common cold coronavirus, OC43, which is around 40% related. So it's a lot more distant. And there was partial protection.
Wow.
So whenever it comes to protection, it really depends how close the virus is to the vaccine.
Right. I mean, there is no one uniform common cold virus. I don't think this is scientifically relevant, but I haven't had so much as a sniffle since I've been vaccinated. So does this mean researchers might want to develop a universal coronavirus vaccine that could, as you said, help against future pandemics?
Right. And in a way, the more realistic way is just to making generic vaccines based on specific families instead of just one vaccine that could control all different coronaviruses. I think that's unrealistic because these viruses are tremendously heterogeneous, but it's more realistic to think about specific coronavirus families, right? So in that context, what our paper showed is that if you just use a vaccine that is developed for a SARS-related virus, then you get protection against many of these SARS-related viruses, including SARS-1 and SARS-2.
Very interesting. There's another study with some fascinating results that you were a part of, and this involves AstraZeneca, and the participants in this were accidentally given a lower first dose of the shot, and that actually caused perhaps greater immunity. Explain that for us.
Right. When it comes to the immune system, sometimes less is more. And what we found is that a very low dose of vaccine, this is an adenovirus vector vaccine, which is somewhat similar to the J&J, but it's based on Ad5, which is mostly, is very similar to the CanSino one that is used in China. But what we show is that a very gentle primary immunization with a very low dose of vaccine and then booster with the standard dose was better than standard dose. So it's funny because whenever it comes to the immune system, sometimes less is more. And with the low dose, you get a qualitatively superior response that could expand better upon a subsequent booster immunization.
In lay terms, can you explain why that is?
Yeah, it's not very clear why that is the case, but it seems like with the low dose, you get this so-called central memory T cell response. And it's basically cells that are quantitatively, it's less of a response, but qualitatively is better. So the cells have better quality. We don't really understand why you get this superior quality, but then once you get the booster, they expand a lot better. So those memory T cells, those antibodies, that response expands better. It's not very clear why that's, but it could be related to the quality of the immune response when you give a very low dose of vaccine.
Very quickly, we only have a couple seconds left, but does that mean that folks might want to think about altering the dosage? I mean, if they haven't gotten their first or second or booster shot yet.
No, I think we should follow what the FDA says. I don't want to make policy with this, but this is something that could inform future vaccine design, not only for SARS-CoV-2, but potentially for other diseases, in a way of how we design vaccines, how we make clinical trials. Maybe we should also test dose escalation within the same cohorts.
All right, so very interesting for future inquiry. And our thanks to Pablo Peñalosa McMaster. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Paris.
And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, it was the longest intermission in Steppenwolf Theater's 46-year history. But the celebrated theater is coming back bigger than ever. There was a ribbon cutting and dedication this morning at Steppenwolf headquarters on North Halsted Street for a new wing. It includes a state-of-the-art stage and a tribute to the late artistic director Martha Lavey in the form of a mural by Chicago artist Tony Fitzpatrick. Producer Mark Vitale toured the addition and spoke with the new leadership about the future.
Steppenwolf Theater has expanded its footprint with the Liz and Eric Lefkofsky Arts and Education Center. The $54 million addition was designed by Gordon Gill of Chicago's Adrian Smith and Gordon Gill Architecture. At its heart, the new building has an additional theater, an intimate space with seating on 4 sides of the stage. It's topped off by The Loft, a theater education center for young people. Years in the planning, the opening follows a 20-month intermission at Steppenwolf.
Our industry was very hard hit by the pandemic. The performing arts were among the first to close, and we're now the last to reopen. But we're thrilled that during that time, construction was declared an essential service by the governor, and we were able literally to see this building rise as a commitment, not only that Steppenwolf would be back, but that arts and culture would remain at the center of this beautiful city we call home in Chicago.
Also new, 2 artistic directors. We spoke with them about the opportunities the space brings.
This, for us, is a crown jewel in a way. For myself, growing up on the South Side, I wasn't aware of arts in the same way. I wasn't aware of definitely theater or actors or a life in the theater. And I think that we'll now have a wonderful entry point for students in their teenage years to come here and say, oh, this is available to me.
We're going to do a better job because there's 2 of us with 2 different experiences, perspectives, and there is going to be collision there. And I think it is only through those kinds of collision and staying open and listening and being actively willing to change that we can actually collaborate with compassion.
Raise the soft palate, and then I give the pump a delicate squeeze.
Both new artistic directors are actors in the ensemble. This is Audrey Francis with Rainn Wilson in the political farce The Doppelganger.
Sorry, Fred, but I've asked him not to address me like that multiple times.
And here's Glenn Davis in the acclaimed production Downstate.
You happy now? Hell yeah!
Glenn Davis also appeared on Broadway with Robin Williams in Bengal Tiger at the Baghdad Zoo. Visit us online for Davis's account of working with Robin Williams.
Don't you let him in. He comes back here.
First up at Steppenwolf, continuing the revival of Tracy Lett's Bug, which had its run cut short in 2020. Upcoming shows include an adaptation of Eve Ewing's 1919 and King James, about the influence of LeBron James on 2 lifelong friends.
So as artistic director, you're the artistic leader of the theater. So you're in many ways the face of the organization, but also you are making decisions on programming, which artists you engage with from top to bottom. The ensemble is so vast now. We're almost 50 company members. At any particular time, you have a third of the company who's in Chicago, a third in New York, and a third in LA. So it's a lot to bring together.
The things that we're working on the most are having an equitable environment for everyone, artists, staff, and audiences, and the way that we need to do that is across every department.
Everyone brings to the table their best selves and their best ideas. We have a model of running an arts organization where there really isn't meant to be a hierarchy. This is both an homage to our past and the amazing collection of artists that have created this fierce space for expression, and also a promise to our future.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
And as we mentioned, the new Arts and Education Center was dedicated this morning. The new theater won't host a play until the new year, but the show Bug returns to the downstairs theater next week. Now, Paris, back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, Illinois modernized its tax laws this year to capture more online sales taxes. What does that mean for your pocketbook and that of local governments? West Garfield Park's Aldi closes its doors. What barriers does that leave for some Chicagoans to access fresh, healthy foods? And how a Northwestern medicine study on baldness there's that bald mouse again. Baldness in mice could one day lead to hair loss treatments for men and women. But first, some more of today's top stories. Reverend Jesse Jackson is released from the hospital after falling and hitting his head. The 80-year-old activist and civil rights leader was at Howard University in Washington, D.C. yesterday in support of students protesting living conditions on campus. He was taken to the Howard University Hospital and kept overnight for observation. Jackson, who has Parkinson's disease, was also hospitalized over the summer after a breakthrough COVID-19 infection. And Chicago marks its first freeze of the season. Just after 6:30 a.m. this morning, O'Hare Airport recorded 32 degrees for the first time this fall. It was slightly behind schedule, according to the National Weather Service, which says the city usually sees its first freeze between October 21st and the 30th. Tonight's overnight low is expected to get down to 30 degrees. So long, outdoor plants. Right about the time the pandemic hit, an Illinois law took effect that changed how online sales are taxed. Government officials say when it comes to balancing the books, the law came at a fortuitous time. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more details. Amanda.
Yeah, Paris, the holidays are approaching, which means that it's time for cookies, family, decorating, and one of my favorites, shopping. Sales tax plummeted in the early days of COVID when many shops were forced to at least temporarily close their doors. But sales tax revenues are rising again. According to the State Department of Revenue, sales and use receipts from January to September 2021 are up 17% from that same time period in 2019, pre-pandemic. Is it because people are shopping more or because of that change you referenced in state tax law? President of the Taxpayer Federation of Illinois, Carol Portman, says the answer is both. For more on that, let's backtrack a bit. Portman says when sales taxes were invented in the 30s, stores were mostly brick and mortar.
Generally speaking, most commerce was done in person at, you walked to the store, or, you rode your buggy to the store and you bought your things. And it was easy to calculate sales tax. Tax was due based on the amount of money that was paid at the store, and the tax that was due was based on the town where that store was.
Now, fast forward, a lot of folks do at least some of their shopping online. For logistical and legal reasons, it took governments nationwide a while to catch up with that change. Sales taxes weren't charged by many online sellers, and there were even U.S. Supreme Court cases that forbid it if a seller had no physical location in state.
Tax was still due, and you as the customer were supposed to say, oops, my seller forgot to collect tax. I'll write a check to the Illinois Department of Revenue to make up the difference. Not surprisingly, not very many people did that.
How shocking, I know there. Even when states did begin actually forcing the taxing of online sales, there were holes in that so-called marketplace facilitator. So think Amazon or eBay, but also a lot of similar smaller sites were initially exempt. And that changed in January 2020, just before COVID. Illinois law began requiring e-marketplaces to begin collecting the state sales tax of 6.25%.
Even that was still frustrating to the municipalities who weren't getting their piece of it, and to some of the brick and mortar retailers who were still collecting over 10% in some places. And so their virtual competitors were collecting, tax was now being applied, but only at 6.25. Whereas if you're at a jurisdiction where the tax is going to be over 10, you're still at a competitive disadvantage.
Brick and mortar stores got their level playing field this year. Starting in January, Illinois added a requirement that all marketplace facilitators also collect those local sales taxes. So yes, Chicago, Cook County combined is where it comes to 10.25%.
Not just the state 6.25, it's the rate that applies at your house. When you are ordering online and something comes to you, it's not the tax at the place, at the warehouse, it's not the tax at their home location, it's your tax, it's the tax that applies where you live.
As a result, Portman says that Illinois is now capturing a lot of revenue from vendors that it wouldn't have but a few years ago. Sorry to those who do most of their shopping online. It did come at a fortunate time for state and local revenues.
I think we would all have rather not had a pandemic to prove the point. But regardless, good timing. It is not over the top to say that retail literally saves state and local governments' budgets as a result of those laws.
Now, because of how taxes are reported, it's difficult to really drill down and tell how much of this is attributable to changes in consumer spending, to the new laws, exactly how much more the state or local governments are getting back from this change. But we do know Illinois is seeing an uptick in sales. You can see that on a chart. The gray line is 2021. And head of the Illinois Retail Merchants Association, Rob Carr, says that it is helping local budgets across Illinois, and the data does show that, he says, including Cook County and Chicago's.
Prior to the pandemic, we had 55 million plus tourists a year, which we don't have now. We had 2.7 million people a day coming downtown. We don't have that today. So this law is very literally saving Chicago as well.
And with that, Paris, happy shopping. Back to you.
All right, Amanda, thanks very much. Not very happy shopping usually for me. I'll go online. And up next, shopping for food and what can be done to make that easier. But first, we take a look at the weather.
The West Side now has one fewer grocery store after Aldi abruptly shuttered its West Garfield Park location last month. Residents say the closure worsens the area's already inequitable access to food. This often means residents, mostly in Black and brown communities, have to travel much further, sometimes leaving their neighborhoods to get the food they need. We spoke with Teron Hawk, a resident of West Garfield Park. He lives right behind the now former grocery store, and here's a bit of what he said.
I have to go all the way to Halsted and Madison. I'm 3800 West, and I think that's 800 West to Whole Foods on Halsted and Madison. We have a store directly across the street from Aldi's, has a sign that says Madison Supermarket, but they're not a supermarket. They're like a candy store, a cigarette store. Can't buy a loaf of bread there. Can't buy a gallon of milk there.
And joining us now to discuss how this impacts communities and what can be done to address it are Angela Odoms-Young, Associate Professor at Cornell University in the Division of Nutritional Sciences. She previously worked at UIC and remains based here in Chicago. And Ruby Ferguson, Food Equity Policy Lead for the City of Chicago. Thanks to you both for joining us. So first, Angela Odoms-Young, let's start with you, please. What we've described is often called a food desert, though many advocates are arguing that this should be considered food apartheid instead. Explain that to us, please.
Yeah, I think it's really important to think about the source. We know that limited food access in communities of color is really rooted in social and structural oppression. And so part of this thinking that is just naturally occurring is not the case. It really is systemic factors that play a role in deciding where certain types of resources are located and where they're not located.
Communities on the South and West Side, mostly Black and brown communities, they've faced, decades of disinvestment. We know this. Ruby Ferguson, what impact has this had on access to food for the people in those neighborhoods?
Yeah, so we have to look at our food system as a whole and think about affordability, accessibility, and also the cultural relevance of food, right? So when we think about community, when we think about food, that's celebrations for barbecues, that's Thanksgiving, that's birthday cakes. And so when you think about the additional layers of mental stress that get put on putting food on the dinner table, we're just exacerbating unhealthy conditions that already existed.
Now, when we spoke to resident Teron Hawk, he said that he uses an electric bike to get around, but it doesn't have a basket to carry groceries. Here's a little bit more of him.
I have to Uber down to the store when I have to change my whole routine when it comes to groceries now. I could go to Aldi's 3 or 4 times a day and just get those little things that will sustain me for a month, and now that's gone, and I miss them. I really do.
Angela, how much of Chicago faces food ecosystems similar to what Teron Hawk experiences now?
Unfortunately, a significant amount. I think part of the way that we're thinking about it, even talking about the fact that one Aldi left a community, that is really upsetting. Listening to the description from the community resident about how this departure of Aldi has impacted his shopping pattern and just the additional stress that's been put on him because of this issue. And this is just a very common story. Unfortunately, it's not only in Chicago, it's across the country. When you look at particularly Black communities and their access to food. And so partly, if we take a snapshot of a food ecosystem, not just a supermarket, then we could say that the majority of communities are in this situation because there is no diversity of food retail in most Black communities.
And it sounds like the fact that this one grocery store has left and Aldi is indicative, and the impact that it's having is indicative of a problem that already existed for people there. Ruby, how does this impact a community's health?
Yeah, so when we think about health, right, it's agency to have choice about what you consume daily. It's access to fresh fruits and vegetables. It's not having to manage thinking about where you're shopping for dinner, right? And so when one grocery store is causing an entire community to feel like they don't have access to fresh and healthy foods, it makes it very challenging to consider your health as a whole.
Angela, how can this be addressed? Is it just about a matter of adding more grocery stores? What needs to be done?
No, I think it's a matter of looking at food and planning, looking at food when we think about economic investments in communities. It's overall community development. Grocery stores tend to be an anchor for other types of retail development, and it also brings jobs. So it's estimated that there's about 25 jobs for every 10,000 square feet of store space. And so a grocery store could bring in 150 or 200 jobs. And so we need to think about in the entire community, not just, okay, we're going to locate one store. And I hate to always use the comparison to Lincoln Park, but if the Aldi in Lincoln Park closed, it probably wouldn't even be a huge story because of the amount of food retail, restaurants, and other food-related businesses that are located in that community. So I think it's really important that we consider overall food retail and also food ownership within communities of color. Who owns it? What's there?
And Ruby, what is the Chicago Food Equity Council doing to address this?
Yeah, so I'm very excited to announce that with ARP funds, we were able to put in a proposal for a food equity approach. And so that includes starting a Chicago Good Food Fund, which gives us an opportunity for community to drive solutions to address food insecurity. So the premise behind this is that there will be funding opportunities that include technical assistance training to catalyze community-based solutions for issues. We know that every community solution is not going to be the same, and that when community solutions are driven by members of that space, they're more likely to last for longer. There are roots, there are teeth with that solution. So we're excited to announce that we'll have a Chicago Good Food Fund, as well as support for other elements of the food system like urban agriculture. So if we think about local fresh foods and how we get them in our community, how can we also support growers in the community to support culturally relevant foods for that community?
Okay, more to come on that. We look forward to hearing back from you on that. Ruby Ferguson and Angela Odoms-Young, thanks to you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, a round of research making waves in the world of science. Stay with us.
Coverage of science and technology on Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Joel M. Friedman, president of the Alvin H. Baum Family Fund.
Northwestern medicine researchers discover a cause of baldness in mice. Scientists probe the atmosphere of a distant exoplanet. A study of the pelvis of a saber-toothed tiger reveals the caring side of an extinct big cat, and how mass poaching has led to tuskless elephants in Mozambique. Joining us now to help explain the science behind the headlines is University of Chicago paleontologist Neil Shubin. Neil, welcome back. I think the last time you and I spoke was some time ago when the pandemic first began, and so there's been a lot of science news to cover. But let's start with scientists at Northwestern Medicine. They have discovered a cause of balding in mice that could have implications for treatments of hair loss in men and women. What did these researchers do, and what did they discover?
Well, they discovered mice that actually go bald, both the males and the females. They lose their hair by 6 months. And what happens in these mice is the hair, just like humans, grows out of hair follicles. And inside the hair follicles are stem cells, special cells, that are important for the rejuvenation of the follicle. Turns out in these mice, the stem cells sort of detach from the follicle, just abnormally, and then they leave the follicle, and then the follicle degenerates. So these stem cells are really necessary for it. And they identified a series of genes, mutations, that cause this kind of baldness. And since humans have these genes and humans have these stem cells, perhaps there's an analogy and some important consequences for human baldness.
Well, and on that note, are there similarities between mice and humans for this to potentially lead to treatments for humans?
Yeah, there are. The genes of mice and people, particularly in this case, that are controlling the stem cells, are similar enough that what researchers are interested in doing is maybe trying to keep these genes functioning. That is, to keep these genes making the kinds of glue that hold the stem cells there. If they can do it in mice, then maybe they can do it in people, and it'll be one way to avoid and prevent baldness in humans.
Okay, so an international team of scientists, including researchers from the University of Chicago, they discovered a new way to probe the atmosphere of a distant planet some 340 light years away. How did they do this, and what did they find?
Think about that. This is amazing. What they did is they used a ground-based telescope in Chile, on top of a mountain in Chile. And what they did is they designed a technique to analyze the light from this particular planet, which is 340 light years away. It's just enormous distance. And what they did is they were able to pick up the wavelengths of the light and interpret what molecules are in the atmosphere. And not only that, what their abundance is. So they were able to tell that there is a certain concentration of water and a certain concentration of carbon monoxide in this planet, which is so far away. It's just a stunning technology.
Now, we're calling this next story Hips Don't Lie. Researchers studying the bones of saber-toothed tiger cats at La Brea Tar Pits in L.A. They say they discovered a softer side of these ferocious-looking cats. How did they make this discovery?
Yeah, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of bones known from the La Brea Tar Pits, and some of them are saber-toothed tigers. Well, it turns out some of these tigers have great gross deformities in their hip joints, in both the pelvis and the femur. And so scientists collaborated with orthopedic surgeons from UCLA, paleontologists working with physicians and surgeons, were able to identify that these hips were not deformed because of accidents or disease. These saber-toothed tigers were born with these kinds of hips. There's no way they could have walked normally. Now think about that for a second. In the wild, animals born with deformed hips, particularly saber-toothed tigers, which are known to hunt aggressively and take in a very aggressive style, there's no way these animals would have survived without help. So what does it show? It shows social structures in these extinct creatures, which we never would have imagined.
Right. They were born with a hip dysplasia, meaning like in order to even have food, family members would have had to have helped them, basically, share food with them and protect them.
That's right. It's amazing, isn't it, that what you can interpret from these fossils? And so they clearly had help. And, you know, they clearly were supported throughout their entire lives during hunting or relatives providing them food. We don't know the type of social interaction. We just know they survived because of those social interactions.
Okay. Researchers in Mozambique, though, they say that widespread poaching has literally changed the evolution of elephants. What have they found there?
Isn't that amazing? So elephants have really suffered from poaching, particularly during the Civil War, which ran in Mozambique from about 1972 to 1997. During that time, poachers were killing elephants for their ivory, which is obviously worth a considerable amount of money, and wiped out about 90% of the population in Mozambique. What that did is it was actually a selection experiment. They actually caused natural selection in the wild, such that typically in elephant populations, there's a low level of a mutation that causes individuals not to have tusks. What happened in this case is it favored the evolution of creatures that didn't have tusks because they survived poaching. The poachers wouldn't kill them. So what we've seen is that the frequency of this mutation, tuskless elephants, has increased over time. And the idea is that it increased largely because poachers were wiping out the animals that had tusks.
And before we let you go, Neil, you know, in the absence of poaching, would the impact of this mutation, could it be reversed?
Yeah, that's the thinking. That is, you know, with the increased regulations on poaching, which is increased enforcement on poaching, the idea is within the next 10 to 15 years, we'd find tusks return.
Okay. Neil Shubin, good to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
And you can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night, live at 7. The ongoing vaccine battle between city leaders and police. Our Spotlight Politics team weighs in.
And the company formerly known as Facebook recently announced it's diving deep into the metaverse. What exactly is this new virtual landscape? Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm representing dozens of families in the crash of a Boeing 737 MAX 8 jet. Mr. Clifford is the lead counsel in litigation in federal